What's up, casual builders? Tim here, and today I'm going to walk you through how I modeled out this garage shelving unit in Fusion. It's a pretty basic design. It uses 2x4s and 1/2-inch plywood, but it serves its purpose, holding some 27-gallon storage totes. So in this video, we're going to cover a few things, like using parameters, creating some offset planes so we can do some mirroring, the rectangle pattern tool, staying organized with components, and then finally using an extension to see how much material we'll need and how to optimize our cuts. So if this is something that you're interested in learning more about, stick around and I'll show you how it's done. Okay, to get started, I went up to Modify and then clicked on Change Parameters. I'm building this shelving unit in my next video. It's for a friend of mine, it's in his garage, and he's given me a few dimensions that we need to work with. So using parameters, I can build this whole thing out based upon some preset measurements, so if I need to go back and change anything later on, I can easily do that. Alright, so what are we adding here? We've got the total length, which is 84 inches. The total width, 23.5 inches, so we can get 2 shelving tops from 1 sheet of plywood. The height of the casters, which I believe is 4.25. And then I like to include the standard sizing of the materials which we'll be using. The 2x4 thickness, which will be 1.5 inches, the 2x4 width, 3.5 inches, and then plywood thickness, 1/2 inch. I also want to add in the bottom spacing, basically the gap between the bottom of the shelving unit and where the first shelf will sit, which will be 3.5 inches. And then the most important one, the one that determines the shelf spacing, the overall height of the storage totes, which will be 15 inches. And lastly, the total height. I saved this one for last because I want to reference some of the other parameters we just created to make this one. All right, so it's going to be the bottom gap, plus the width of 4 2x4s to account for the 4 shelves, plus plywood thickness times 4, same reasoning. And then lastly, add in the height of the storage totes, but only 3 this time. And this is all we need to get started. So press OK and let's create our first sketch. And this sketch will be on the ground plane. Pressing R for rectangle, let's move our cursor to the origin and start drawing. For the first dimension, start by typing out the total width, press enter, then tab to the next dimension, which will be the total length. This sketch will just be a guide for the entire footprint of the shelving unit. Next, we're going to go back to that origin point and start drawing another rectangle, but this time it's for the 2x4, so 2 by width and then 2 by thickness. And that's all we need for this sketch at the moment, so hit finish sketch. And the reason we're not creating more at each corner is because when we create the first post, we're going to do some mirroring to duplicate them. So select the face of that little rectangle we just made and then press E for extrude. This distance will be the total height, so type that in and then press enter. After your first extrusion from a sketch, it will automatically hide it, so go back to the browser and click the eye so it becomes visible again. And while we're at it, let's just take this body and turn it into a component. Guys, real quick, I'm sure you've noticed, but this voiceover was made after the fact. If you're interested in a longer walkthrough while I talk through things as I'm doing them, go check out my Patreon page. I've got the full video there for my patrons. Well, just one patron at the moment. I appreciate you, Zach. All right, cool. Back to the video. Since these shelves will be carrying a decent amount of weight, I wanted to double them up. Usually I'd glue 2 pieces of 2x4s together and then get them to a square dimension using my jointer and my planer, but I'm going to be making these at my friend's house using limited tools. So I'm going to go for like a fake dado type of style. You'll see in a second. So with the inside face of that 2x4 selected, I created a new sketch on that plane. But first, I headed back to parameters to add one more item. And this one will be called middle spacing. And the dimensions will be the tote height plus the plywood thickness. And again, starting at that origin spot, I drew some more rectangles that will extrude to make the fake dados, starting with the bottom gap, then the 2x4 width, then that new parameter we just made for the middle spacing, and then the 2x4 width again, the middle spacing again, and then repeat that same process all the way up to the top. And by fake dado, all I mean is that instead of removing material to create the dado, we'll be adding material, but not in the space where the dado will be. And if all our measurements are right, we should have a little material left at the top of the post, which should be the thickness of our top plywood panel. Next, let's finish that sketch, and then holding Shift, let's select all of those faces that we'll need to extrude. It'll be that bottom gap and then each one of those longer middle spacing pieces as well. With all of them selected, press E for extrude, bring it out to the 2x4 thickness, and then change the operation to new body and hit OK. And while we're at it, let's rename all of those bodies that we just created and turn them into components. Also, I created another component at the parent level and named it Post, and then I dragged all the other components into that one. This will just make things easier for us later on and helps to clean up the browser a bit. Okay, moving on. And speaking of moving, we need to copy this post to the other 3 corners. Instead of just moving the piece and creating a copy, let's use the mirror tool instead. It's an easier method and it's more effective as well. So to do this, we need to create a new plane. So head on up to the top navigation, click on Construct, and then choose Offset Plane. Click on the plane that's along the length, the one that would be able to drag to the middle, but widthwise. It's kind of confusing to explain, but think about the plane as where you'd fold a piece of paper. So in this case, we're going to fold it the hot dog way, and the distance for this plane will be the total width, but divide that by 2 so we can put it right in the middle. Then, with the post component selected, go up to Create and then click on Mirror. Since we already have the object selected, we just need to choose the plane, so click on the one we just created and press OK. And now we just need to do this one more time, but the difference being, select the plane that will run lengthwise and set the distance to total length divided by 2. Next, select both of the post components and mirror them to that new plane. Let's start working on building out the shelves, starting with the bottom one. Create a new sketch on the outside face of one of the posts, and then all you really need to do is draw a rectangle that will fit within the dado. As long as we're snapping the rectangle to certain points of our model, we don't need to worry about using parameters for determining the length and the width. After this rectangle is built, click Finish Sketch, and then extrude it towards the middle using 2x thickness dimension. You might have to write out minus 2x thickness to make sure that it's going in the right direction. And then let's mirror this to the other side. Again, offset plane, total width divided by 2, select the component, and mirror using that plane to create one for the other side. To complete this frame, we need some shorter slat pieces that will sit in between the longer ones. Go ahead and hide one of the longer frame pieces and create a sketch on the inside face of the other one. Zoom in and create a rectangle, making sure it snaps to the corners of that dado. Then finish that sketch, select the rectangle we just made, and extrude it to the other side, making sure the operation is set to new body and not join. The distance here will be the total width, but minus 2x thickness times 2 to account for the thickness of those 2 outside frame pieces. We want a few more of these shorter slats to span the length of the shelf, and we'll use the rectangular pattern tool for that. So with the shorter slat selected, head up to Create, choose Pattern, and then Rectangular Pattern. It's going to ask which axis to run the pattern along, just select one of the longer edges. And for the distance, we want this to be the total length, but subtract 3 2x4 thicknesses. Basically, that's the 2 outer 2x4s and the 1 slat that we already created. And then for how many, I did 4 for the quantity. And let's create a new component and call it 2x4 frame or something, and then drag all of those other components into that one. And for the plywood top to this frame, it's as simple as creating a new sketch using the top of the 2x4 frame as the plane. I drew out a rectangle over the top and then 4 smaller rectangles at each corner. After finishing the sketch, I selected the face, making sure to include the overlaps on the frame, and extruded it to a new component with a distance of the plywood thickness, 1/2 inch. And now let's select the 2x4 frame component, and using the rectangular pattern tool again, let's bring it up and create some more copies for the other 3 shelves. The process here is the same, but for the distance, we're going to need to do the total height and then subtract the 2x4 width times 2, and then finally 1 plywood thickness. Also, depending upon your model, you may have to start with negative total height and then add those things back to the equation rather than subtract. And let's do the same exact thing for the plywood top, but this time we're only going to do the 2 middle shelves, not the top one, because the top shelf won't need those notches cut out in the corners. The distance for this one will be the middle spacing times 2, and the 2x4 width times 2 as well. And lastly, let's create that top shelf. And to do this, I just created a sketch on the top plane. I drew out a rectangle, and then I extruded that rectangle by the plywood thickness. And the only thing left to do for this model was to clean up the components and organize things a little bit. I created one master component and I called it shelf. And I threw everything in that. Since I'll be making 2 of these, it just made it easier to select that one master component and duplicate it so that I can work on getting the full cut list. One piece of advice is that as you're building out your projects here, open up the parameters window and change things around as you go, just to make sure that everything looks right and it's acting the way it should. I modeled this out a few times before making this video, so I was sure it was going to work in the end, but it did take some trial and error beforehand. And I've mentioned this a few times in some of my other Fusion videos, but I'm a huge fan of this parametric modeling thing. For example, let's say that after chatting with my friend, he actually wants this to be a little bit longer. All I need to do is go back into there and change the length to something else, and then everything scales appropriately. And finally, I use an extension called Mapboards Pro to build out my cut lists. I believe I paid like $25 for this, and you have it for a lifetime. None of this subscription stuff. It's as easy as clicking on the extension, setting the dimensions for your stock, in this case a 4x8 sheet of 1/2-inch plywood, and some 10-foot long 2x4s. And after setting that, click OK, you wait a little bit, and it lays everything out on the floor for what you'll need. This came in super handy when I was working with my friend because he was asking for how much material we'd need for these shelves, so it saves a ton of time. Okay, that's the end of this one. Hope you guys found this helpful, and if you did, would love if you hit that like button. Also, I'm trying out a new video cadence on the channel, one video like this one, and in the next, I'll build out the thing that we modeled out. So if that sounds up your alley, would appreciate a subscribe if you're not already. Cool. Thanks, guys. See you soon when we build this thing out in real life.